I think we can all agree we know what status effects are in JRPGs, right? It's that thing you try once, and it doesn't work, so you never try it again. It's that thing that keeps you stunned, or annoys the shit out of you when you can't attack for 5 turns straight. Or, you know, it makes one of your party members heal the final boss and totally throw your entire run in the garbage. Maybe this is just me, but generally when I hear status effects, I usually only think of small things like poison and paralysis. I don't usually think of things like getting turned into a mushroom in Super Mario RPG, or having balloons attached to your head and make you float away. Yeah, that's pretty weird. So, what is a status effect in the first place? A status effect can be defined as a temporary modification to a game character's original set of stats that usually come into play when special powers and abilities are used. This is honestly pretty vague, and I would probably even go as far as to say a status effect is the direct change in a character or being's default state. This is not something that is exclusive to JRPGs, obviously. They are featured prominently in a lot of other games, oftentimes in ways that complement the gameplay and provide another obstacle or tool for the player. So why do I think that they are generally lackluster in JRPGs? Well, before I answer that, let's get specific. Skills that raise and lower stats, like defense down and attack up, anything that heals or does damage over time, that's a status effect. Getting covered in piss, that's a weird status effect, but still a status effect. There are many different kinds of status effects that people don't consider to be status effects. Anything from breaking someone's guard to covering them in milk is technically a status effect, since it quite literally is, as the name implies, affecting the status of the character with some sort of effect. I think it's really important to make the distinction clear on what is or isn't a status effect. For the status effects that I'm going to be looking into today, I have made 3 categories. 1. Status effects that are just kinda okay. These are status effects that meet the bare minimum requirements for what a status effect is and how it functions. They do exist in their games, not really making a splash, but still being present. Number 2, status effects that are weird. These consist of status effects that are memorable, not because of their usefulness or utility, but because they are remembered for their unique weirdness. And finally, status effects that just do awesome shit. Basically, it's status effects that are just good. They're an effective tool for the player while also being a notable threat. These types of status effects will be impossible to ignore, as they usually feature game mechanics that, if used correctly, can be a viable strategy or a detrimental attack. Overall, I feel that status effects are greatly underutilized, specifically in JRPGs. Oftentimes there's little to no use, or just your standard value like stat buffs and debuffs. What if there are ways to implement them that don't feel so unimportant? The value of a status effect can go a long way in making a difference in a JRPG's combat. But the question I want to answer today is, what exactly is the correct amount of value a status effect should have? Should it always be viable, or should it be a unique skill that takes advantage of an enemy's vulnerabilities in select situations? Or, I don't know, fuck it. Should it just turn you into a frog and give you a good laugh once in a while? Most JRPGs tend to have just okay status effects. They do the job, sometimes. It functions as a tool for the player while also being a problem. Status effects in this category are either not worth the risk because they feel like they are unlikely to hit and your turn would be better spent attacking or healing, or worth the risk but are oftentimes a waste of time to extend battle way longer than needed. To be fair, in a situation where a fight is going south and you need to whip out status effects to potentially shift the odds in your favor, that's a bit of a different story, but it's still going to make battles way longer and you may not even win in the end. In a game genre that likes to throw battles at you every 10 feet, it's not exactly appealing to want to turn every fight into an ordeal because you wanted to use sleep powder. Sure, it might help out against the occasional tough battle, but who's to say Thunderwave misses and suddenly you're hit with Dragon Breath? Worst of all, bosses tend to be completely immune to status effects. In your hour of need when it could make all the difference, it's not even a possibility. Suddenly, this tool on your tool belt is taken away because you're a toddler and you're not allowed to play with that anymore. Most of the time, you can only debuff the boss or buff your team. That's it. Usually status effects that are in this category are poison, sleep, paralysis, blind, and other things that usually restrict an enemy in some way. Many Final Fantasy games, especially early installments, make offensive status magic feel pointless. Traditionally, Final Fantasy bosses are immune to most negative status effects, with only rare exceptions, so trying to inflict ailments like bind or sleep on them is almost always a complete waste of time. And sure, you could totally chalk this up to it's just my opinion, but it kind of isn't. Let's take off the rose-tinted glasses for a second and let's actually analyze this in a more realistic way. Oftentimes in earlier JRPGs, feeling like padding and filler, status effects tended to make combat feel complex without actually adding any complexity. With rare exceptions, obviously, there were some bosses and enemies that do have vulnerabilities to status effects that can totally change how a fight can go. But 9 times out of 10, players wouldn't try and experiment with status effects to get past a difficult boss. They would oftentimes go grind and try to get stronger. It was a fine strategy, albeit a bit time consuming. It almost puts into question what the purpose of a status effect was back then, other than something to slow the player down. Another example would be Chrono Trigger. This game features a very clear lack of status effects. There's only a few moves in the game that actually inflict status effects. There are a few techs you can do with your party that will inflict status effects, but oftentimes status effects are generally rare, and oftentimes bosses are immune completely. And honestly, it's not really to Chrono Trigger's detriment. In my first playthrough, I didn't really care to try status effects because the team-up attacks took up most of the combat, and that in itself was amazing anyways. So in my first playthrough, I didn't even really notice I wasn't using status effects. Really, it doesn't really serve a purpose in the end. A friend of mine got me thinking when I showed him the script for this video. He told me that in the case of Chrono Trigger, do you even really need status effects? And that got us thinking, do some games even need them in the first place? Obviously, because of the broad nature of status effects, I think if we remove them entirely, there'd be a lot of games that would be ruined. I also mean, what if games like Final Fantasy focused less on the use of status effects, like the offensive status effect magic, and integrated more unique examples like Toad, or Mushroom, or a bad case of I Miss My Mom. Just silly shit, you know? But again, if it's gimmicky and hard to use, then we're back to status effects feeling pointless anyways. Another example is Persona 3 and 4. It's generally not worth it on enemies and bosses are immune. Persona 3 and 4 are great examples of why bother with status effects when you can just this, or that, or one of these, and finish the fight so much faster than if you would even bother with status effects to deal a little bit of damage. Persona 3 is especially bad if you remember Baten Kaito's decks built specifically around status effects are often useless. Since bosses are 100% immune to status effects, this greatly limits the potential that a status effect deck can have. What's the point if it's useless when it matters? In Ni no Kuni, Wrath of the White Witch, players often describe the status effects as filler because they have very little practical use, since killing enemies faster is often the more favored choice. Bravely Default suffers the same situation. In the very rare instance where a boss actually is vulnerable to a status effect, it's not worth it. The value just isn't there. And of course, with standard enemies, it's just a complete waste of time. Why bother when you can finish a fight in 30 seconds? Some of the Dragon Quest games feature the Final Fantasy style status effects, low chance to hit on regular enemies and ineffective on bosses. I could go on and on forever about this because a lot of JRPGs do it wrong. There are many more examples that I could list here, but I'm not going to because that would take forever and be pointless when 90% of the games I could list here all do the same shit. I'm not interested in making another 30-minute video, so 29 minutes will have to do. If we stand back and look at how status effects have functioned for a majority of their life, it sucks. I'm usually the kind of person who likes to use every tool at my disposal because sometimes a situation might call for something really specific, and sometimes it might be really general. But with status effects, it's almost never truly a good time to pull out a status effect. It's more of a side dish. You know, there might be some meals that do have it on the side, and it's great. But if it's just the side, you know, I'd rather get a burger that does 300 damage. Just saying. I feel like a lot of JRPGs just tend to suffer from this same problem where there's a category of weird moves that aren't really that effective to the point where 90% of a player base just doesn't even touch them. Look at Pokemon, for example. Most players will just use attacking moves, and because of how the game is designed, that is completely fine. You can go an entire game without using a status effect on an enemy, and you will probably be fine. While collecting footage for this video, I had to play a lot of these older games to really understand what it was like and how I felt about status effects. And a lot of the times, they just weren't valuable enough for me to even bother. Grinding, just using attacking moves, basic debuffs and buffs were enough to get me through most battles. So realizing super early on in a JRPG that my options for strategies around offensive status effects are ultimately extremely restricting is really discouraging. But at least not all status effects are bad. Some can be really interesting, albeit weird. Like, really weird. So when I say weird status effects, what do you think about? Is it possibly the mushroom from Earthbound? It messes with your controls outside of battle and randomly messes them up more after random periods of time. Because if so, then yeah, that's pretty weird. A little basic, but still weird. But you know what else is weird? I would argue that the way video games implement weird status effects is good. Okay, maybe that's not that weird of an opinion. The thing about weird status effects is that, good or not, they're memorable. Having your controls fucked with, or turning into some kind of weird object, is strange and might catch you off guard or make you chuckle. It's definitely something that's gonna stick with you. Like in Digimon's story Cyber Sleuth, for example, where your Digimon can turn pixelated with the dot status effect. It breaks the fourth wall in a way to an 8-bit throwback. It's not just a debuff, but a visual gag too. Only being able to attack with its basic attack. Meanwhile, the 3D model is replaced by a 2D pixel sprite version of your Digimon. It's basically a silence disable spell, but it's got a new coat of paint that presents it in a funny and weird way. Have you ever missed home before? Like, had a really bad case of homesickness? Like, suddenly you're missing all of your attacks and wasting turns in battle? No, that doesn't sound like you? Well, clearly you haven't played Earthbound then. In Earthbound, there's a status effect that is exclusive to the main character, Ness. What? The status effect is called homesickness. It sometimes causes Ness to miss attacks occasionally and waste turns in battle, talking about how he misses his mom and he's thinking about his favorite food. The only way to get rid of this is to go to a nearby phone booth and call your mom. Sometimes there isn't a phone booth nearby. As inconsequential as this may sound, it actually causes quite a few problems in battle. Anybody who's played Earthbound blind for the first time can tell you that homesickness is a real pain in the ass. But it's something that you need to pay attention to as the player, so you can make sure that your protagonist is fighting at his best. It's pretty cute, to be honest, but it's something that sticks with you if you've played Earthbound. It's an interesting case of a status effect that is woven into the actual story of the game. Ness isn't just a character or a mouthpiece for the player. Ness is just a kid, and he misses his mom. It's a super weird status effect, but it's incredibly memorable. Almost every single person who's played Earthbound could tell you about it. Then there's the balloon status effect that I mentioned in the intro. In the Suikoden series, Suikoden. Did I say that right? There is a status effect that attaches balloons to your characters, and if this happens 3 times, your character will float away, effectively removing them from combat. The only way to stop this would be to pop them with a needle item that was found or purchased. Sort of like an antidote, if you will. It's one of the weirder, more comical status effects out there, while still managing to be a tangible threat against your party. I feel like the paranoia of fighting enemies with 2 balloons attached would be really nerve-wracking, a fear I probably wouldn't forget for a long time. Infatuation in the Pokemon series makes your Pokemon so in love with the enemy Pokemon that they refuse to fight entirely. Status effects in Pokemon games are weird in general, because of how detrimental they can be. This stems from the fact that combat is a 1v1 most of the time, so when you or the enemy are being stopped from attacking, you really feel the impact. It's odd, because in a game like Final Fantasy, where you have 4 characters on screen, if one of them gets a status effect, not the end of the world, you still have 3 other damage dealing sources, right? Pokemon? Nah. You get a status effect, that is a threat that needs to be dealt with. Nothing like fucking rolling a 1 20 times in a row because I'm paralyzed in a Pokemon game. Then we have the Bunny Hood curse in Zelda: A Link to the Past. If Link enters the Dark World without a specific item to reflect his true nature, he turns into a bunny. Now I know I've been kind of sticking to a theme here with JRPGs, but I kind of wanted to throw this one out there. In a game where you're supposed to feel like a big tough adventurer who can take on the world, and you get turned into a bunny. And of course, there's the chicken status effect from Divinity Original Sin. Characters can be attacked by a skill called Chicken Claw. This literally turns whoever's hit by it into a useless clucking chicken, effectively removing them from combat. Then of course, there's Old from the Final Fantasy series, specifically Final Fantasy V, effectively lowering their stats until the end of battle or when they're cured. That doesn't recover the lost stats, it simply stops the degradation. This can be specifically detrimental, especially in longer fights. What about Reverse from Final Fantasy? This status effect makes it so that your healing and damage input and output is reversed. Suddenly, damage heals you and healing hurts you. Now on the surface that seems pretty simple, but in reality you can take advantage of enemies that only have attacking moves. Granted, that may not be very often, but still. Now this may be a bit of a weird exception, but you know what? I did Legend of Zelda, so fuck it. In Undertale, you're blue. Suddenly, when you turn blue, you have to account for gravity when you dodge. It completely changes how you have to approach dodging. It's quite unique, and it's really friggin' weird. I mean, come on. You turn blue. That's not exactly something that happens every day. There are so many status effects out there that are just weird, and they stand out. The best part? These weird status effects aren't just funny. They break the monotony of a long JRPG in the best way. Weird? Absolutely. But weirdness can result in something memorable, and sometimes that's exactly what a game needs. That's why I think weird status effects should be more commonplace. Do something wacky, do something interesting. Make sure that the players are never gonna forget that they turn into a scarecrow or froze in embarrassment. Status effects should not just be a pain in the ass for the player. They should also be a tool that players can exploit to gain numerous advantages. What's better than weird status effects? Oh yeah, status effects that are also... If used correctly, these status effects will make you feel invincible. The best kind of games usually feature interesting gameplay loops that keep players engaged the whole way through, no matter how long a game is. It's not very often that you can find a JRPG that managed to implement status effects well. The general consensus online is that most status effects in JRPGs are either useless or completely overpowered. Some games, like the Xenoblade series, find the perfect balance. In Xenoblade Chronicles 1, a powerful combo to stun enemies is the break combo. Now this doesn't exactly work like your standard status effect, it's more like chaining multiple status effects, each with their own benefits, together to result in more damage. It's kind of like a status effect combo. The way you do it is break, topple, and daze to knock down enemies and keep them stunned so that you can deal continued damage. Your party members will oftentimes have skills catered to this combo. Some characters will exclusively have break skills, while others will only have topple skills. This is to encourage the player to mix up their party and try new setups. Nothing is more satisfying than landing one of those combos while on a difficult fight. Not to mention, applying it in combination with the chain attacks can really dish out some damage. Granted, let's be fair, some enemies are resistant or outright immune to the break combo, but it's not often. Most enemies in the game are vulnerable to this. Xenoblade Chronicles 2 and 3 take this combo to a whole new level. In Xenoblade Chronicles 2, the combo becomes break, topple, then instead of daze, you use launch to send enemies flying and then smash to pummel them into the ground. Xenoblade Chronicles 2 specifically allows you to combine these combos with certain elemental effects to absolutely slam jam enemies. No, seriously, you can turn enemies into a red mist if you set it up correctly. It's wild. Unfortunately, in XE2, daze actually isn't a thing anymore. It was replaced with launch to set up for the smash combo. Honestly, I'm not too upset since daze only really allowed for more damage over time instead of a big burst of damage. Speaking of burst, in Xenoblade Chronicles 3, however, daze makes a really cool return, and this time, it's packing heat. Using the break combo in Xenoblade Chronicles 3 lets you choose 2 different routes in your combo. You can now either launch enemies and set them up for a smash, or daze them and set them up for a new status effect called Burst. Burst not only does a significant amount of damage, but it also forces enemies to drop more loot. Shout out my loot goblins. Introducing 2 different combo routes into the break combo was a really good idea. It gave the player choice in their combos. Once again, I am saying that giving players options and letting them choose how they want to play is a good thing. What? You're telling me that people enjoy making their own choices? Come on. I think the Xenoblade games are excellent examples that use interesting and unique status effects that completely change how you approach situations in combat. Obviously, it's not perfect. With Xenoblade Chronicles 3's abundance of party members at one time, I often felt like I had no control over which combo would activate. The AI would often make the right choices and finish a combo for me. But if that's the bare minimum for my complaints, then I think that's pretty fucking good. Oh no, my steak is too juicy, my lobster's too buttery. Womp womp. These types of status effects are a far cry away from 30% chance to maybe freeze the enemy for a turn or two. It's actually quite surprising how different they are. You can tell the Xenoblade devs wanted this system to matter. Each battle feels like every tool you have at your disposal is useful. You don't always have to use the break combo. Sometimes you can't use it. It's just like any other status effect that way. It's situational. If you remember to use it or even try it, it will provide results in either damage or information. The Etrian Odyssey games feature a prominent use of status effects. Oftentimes, the bosses, or FOEs, which are just mini-bosses, are susceptible to status effects. Though they are still resistant, they are not completely immune, which is notable for a turn-based JRPG. Each boss can be tackled from different angles. Maybe an enemy you thought you had no chance against is actually vulnerable to poison or paralysis.
John FOE.
Yeah, sure, step aside, kid, we're not.
Suddenly, you're feeling a bit more confident and rather proud of yourself for not only discovering that weakness, or Googling it, but also finding a new strategy to take down a tough boss. You can make your own choices for how you want to gain the advantage. It's not just another button mash through the combat text boxes. Not to mention, Etrian Odyssey features the ability to put skill points into their stats to actually increase the likelihood of a status effect working. This is so much better than having a set percentage. Not only does this give the player opportunities for different builds, but it also makes status effects more valuable through the player's direct actions. You want them to be better? Make them better! It's something the player can work towards and be satisfied by doing. All characters, including your party, feature a status effect build-up mechanic. The more an individual character or a monster has a status effect applied to them, the more resistance they build up to it. I think it plays perfectly well into the battle of attrition aspect of JRPGs. Imagine if this was the norm for status effects. Imagine how differently people would view them. You actually have to strategize. It's not just something you can either spam and abuse or something that's useless. There's depth to it. If this was utilized more in JRPGs, I think players would feel way more inclined to actually mess around with status effects. Give them combos, make them work with other skills, make sure that if players can use it, they can find a way to use it well. Obviously, I think if this was standardized, then Etrian Odyssey wouldn't be special. So in this case, Etrian Odyssey shines as a star that did something different, and that's awesome. The effectiveness of status effects can go a long way in adding depth to the combat. The Dragon Quest series features some interesting combos with status effects. Modern entries in the series of Dragon Quest often feature skills like Persecutor and Victimizer, where if an enemy has a status effect applied to them, they will take a lot more damage from these skills. These, combined with other setup skills, can result in some crazy damage. There's not too much to really say about the Dragon Quest series and status effects. They're decent. You can use them. You can find ways to use them. Yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all I got. As a video essay YouTuber, I have to do my due diligence and gush about Persona 5. In the original version of Persona 5, you could inflict status ailments on enemies and then follow up with either a psi or a nuclear attack. This would allow for increased damage and a chance to knock down the enemy. This system sounds good-ish, but it wasn't the greatest in the original Persona 5, mostly because there are a lot more elements than just nuke and psi. Later changed in the re-release, Persona 5 Royal, technical damage became a really important tool in the player's toolkit. In Persona 5 Royal, not only were the elemental affinities of status effects changed, but the entire technical system was also revamped as well. Not only did they introduce new combat mechanics, but also overworld mechanics too. Obviously, if you've played Persona 5, you know that you can go and do things like study and hang out with your friends. Well, in Persona 5 Royal, they added a new place you can go. In there, you can play darts with your friends or alone if you're a total loser. Doing this will actually upgrade your technical rank. With each rank comes increased damage and a higher chance to down enemies. This was especially important because many enemies in Persona 5 Royal lack traditional weaknesses. By applying status effects and then exploiting technical damage with compatible elements, players could effectively replace the need for direct weaknesses with an alternative strategy. This design not only encourages players to think beyond the standard gameplay loop, but is also intuitive enough that most will trigger technical damage by accident, making them naturally aware that it exists. I think a lot of these mechanics are pretty cool. I understand that it's quite difficult to balance out status effects in JRPGs. How would the game designers decide on the strength of status effects? How often should it land? How much agency should the player have? It's honestly a pretty difficult mechanic to balance. So what should they do? Remove them completely from JRPGs? Create a brand new system that enhances how the player interacts with their tools? Lots of hypotheticals we could go into. I think it's hard to say what should happen when we would be speaking strictly in hypotheticals, but we can look at games that have done them well and learn from them and hope that game developers will take notes, because for the love of God, I don't want to cast the same goddamn spell and have it miss 40 times in a row. Thank you. So, what's my final verdict? Well, I think it all comes down to value. Each and every JRPG out there all have different skills of varying value. Is it more valuable to use this skill because it does more damage, or is it more valuable to use this skill because it will do less damage, but has a chance to inflict a status effect that will hinder the enemy for maybe a few turns, or maybe it won't at all? In some games, the inherent value of a status effect is just overall really low. Sometimes it's gimmicky and sometimes it's overpowered, but I would probably say 90% of the time the value isn't there for status effects. And I'm sure lots of you in the comments can agree with me. To simplify it, I would say that status effects are in two categories. They are either too strong or too weak. So most JRPGs have this huge gap between how useful a status effect may be at any time. This does obviously vary throughout the years. Some games have made adjustments in remasters or remakes that improve how status effects function overall. When you're playing a turn-based JRPG, you have to analyze all of your options. If some of your options are just more useful than others, then what's the point of having them as an option? You're obviously going to pick the new car over the mystery box that might have $50 in it, but probably doesn't.
Oops.
It may seem exciting at the potential a status effect could have. Oftentimes, you just can't rely on it. Consistent damage is just more valuable. It needs to have some kind of power scaling so that it feels more like a tool that is on equal levels with all your other tools. Something that can be improved the higher your stats go. Allowing players to level it like a skill or increase its effectiveness or duration could also be an option. What about if we changed how status effects worked on select enemies? Sometimes they work, sometimes it's a lighter effect, or sometimes it's a heavier effect, where an enemy is stunned for a longer duration, or they take more damage. Maybe bosses would still be vulnerable, but less so. Similar to Etrian Odyssey. So damage over time does less, and things like sleep and paralysis wouldn't last as long. Status effects are more than just a simple tool. They can shape an entire combat system if given the chance. They add depth and strategy beyond raw damage. Yet in many games, it feels like developers don't always recognize their full potential. Over time, status effects have often been pushed to the side, either feeling like an afterthought or being defaulted back to the status quo. No pun intended. However, as game design evolves through indie titles and some AA studios, modern titles are experimenting with new ways to make status effects more impactful. Each year, we see developers refining these mechanics, integrating them more seamlessly into combat systems. Look at games like Yakuza Infinite Wealth. Status effects are baked into the combat, even having a job that's specializes in those status effects and increasing damage depending on various factors. Like if you have a status effect, well, there's still room for improvement. Status effects are getting better. It's not perfect, but we're getting somewhere. While many games still struggle with balancing these mechanics, hopefully the industry slowly evolves with some modern JRPGs. Maybe featuring some new and experimental ways to make status effects feel impactful and rewarding. If developers continue to refine these systems, offering ways to scale, modify, or interact with status effects dynamically, it could change the way people view status effects forever. We could see a future where status effects become more than just what they've always been. They could become an important part of any game rather than just the mandatory mechanic. Yeah, I'll try to make the next one quicker. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. If you like this video and want to help me make more, then subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment, giving me your thoughts and perspectives on status effects. If you want to be a part of the next video in some way, shape, or form, then be sure to join my Discord from the link below. There I will do polls asking questions about how you feel about certain mechanics. Or if you don't give a shit about any of that, come join the Discord and tell me what you thought of the video. Anyways, that's all for me today, so thanks for watching, hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one. Ciao.